Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those non and lower contiguous states. My name is Andy, and I'll be the trainer for today's ACI Analytics. Now, if this is the first analytics training you've attended, what we're going to be doing is going over a high-level overview of each of the functions within this new update. I'll also be giving you information on where you can get further information on our websites. We will also be having further trainings as well. So just like this was a free webinar provided to y'all, we encourage you to go to our website and check out the upcoming training calendar because there's almost always something going on. The other thing I would ask is that you hold all questions until the very end of the show. This should run for about 30 minutes or so, depending on how excited I get and how fast I speak. But at the end, what I'll be doing is reviewing the chat panel where people may have sent some specific questions in or things like that. Now, the first thing I should talk about is what a CSV file is, because you'll hear that technology over and over again. You'll hear me say it a couple times. A CSV stands for comma separated value. And at the heart of this ACI Analytics import is the CSV file. What a CSV file is you can think of it as a spreadsheet because Excel and other Word and spreadsheet editors can edit them very easily. It's basically a list of data. It's a table full of elements that you can map or import. And that brings us to our second keyword that you'll hear me say is maps and mapping. Now, you may think of mapping as location maps or flood maps, and you wouldn't be wrong. But this kind of mapping is where we play the game of matching columns and column headers to different data elements in our software. For example, when we have introduced this MLS from Nevada, we had to map the list price field from the MLS to the corresponding list price field on our data points. So that's what we mean by mapping and what a map file is. So you'll hear us say that a couple times, but this basically is what a CSV looks like. This is a nice compact way of exporting data from your MLS. Because this data comes from your MLS, if you're not comfortable with creating a CSV or you're not sure what elements to include in the CSV, we encourage you to reference our website. We have some help documentation there. I'll be showing you those links at the very end of this class. And you can also call your MLS for help too and say, hey, I need to kick out a CSV with my search results so I can feed it to my software, and we'll help you with the rest. So anyhow, that's what a CSV looks like, and that's what I mean when I say we're mapping files. So to start this off, we want to be in an appraisal that has at least a subject address, but any other subject data that you put in there can only help you because it all mashes it together for these analytics. At this point, you will have already gone into your MLS system, performed your search, tightened up your market as it were, and exported that as a CSV. I've got mine saved to the CSV folder on my desktop, easy for me to find. I could keep it in my work file because it's a decent farm list, or I could trash it when I'm done, doesn't matter. To launch the ACI Analytics e-service, I'm going to click on e-services, import analysis data, and ACI Analytics. Now, I know there's some early adopters out there following along at home and clicking, and if you don't see that yet, that ACI Analytics, that's because it's in a special web update. You know how if you run a periodic web update, there's a window in the middle that says Special Update ID. For now, we've got this ACI Analytics tucked away in a special update ID called Analytics. So if you were to run web update, which I wouldn't encourage now because I should be giving a class to you, when you're done and you run web update, just use special update ID Analytics, and then you'll get this e-service. What's the cost, you say? I'm glad you asked. It's bundled with the e-services. So if you already subscribe to e-services, you have access to ACI Analytics. It does not cost choice credits, and there's no subscription for the service. When you click on it, the first thing it's going to do is bring up the screen that shows you all the elements that you'll be importing or manipulating or analyzing. We'll be going down these tabs one by one so I can show you how to get the most out of this. But a quick takeaway here is that this ACI Analytics e-service does a lot of things, and you get to choose what comes back into your report. If you only wanted to use it to import comps, you can do that. If you wanted it to do comps and the regression, but not all the graphs, you can do that. If you only care about the 1004MC and the market graphs, the statistics of your market area, you can do that. So I'll show you. There's a series of checkboxes that make it easy. And remember, it's all the same price, free with e-services. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on Import Property Data. This is where I'm going to go and find that CSV that I had previously exported from my MLS. Now, the first thing that MLS will do when you perform your search or export is provide you a list of some presets. Most MLSs allow you to export, and we work with a lot of the default exports from an MLS, but sometimes you have to build a custom export. So on our website, what I'll show you at the end of our training, or if you get itchy while I'm droning on here and you open up a new tab to go browse the web and check out our website, you'll see a list of the elements or the key data points that must be included in that CSV. Okay, enough about that, Andy. So here I get to choose my CSV file. This is what comes out of the MLS. The service provider map, there's that keyword map I used earlier. The map is your MLS. Now, we've been baking in a whole bunch of regional MLSs, but we can't catch them all. If you don't see yours in this list, or the type like Flex MLS or Rapatoni or Fusion is another one. If you don't see your type in there, then please send us an email to analytics@aciweb.com. And I'll type that out in our chat panel too, so you don't have to try to remember it. But if you've got fast fingers and you're writing this down, you can send a CSV that isn't in this list to analytics@aciweb.com. One of our techs will map the file, put it in our web update, email you to let you know it's in there, and you'll be rocking and rolling. So anyhow, I've chosen my map file. Now I have to browse out for that CSV that I exported. I happen to have it right here on the desktop. I'm going to select it and hit open. Another key thing I should mention here that's been biting a couple of the folks who have tried this early, you want to make sure that that file is not open in Excel or any other program. Because if it's open and being used, you won't be able to use it within ACI Analytics. Now that I've got that data loaded, I just click OK, and it begins making magic. What it's doing under the hood, verifying the addresses, making sure that they are truly parsable and mappable, because the mapping comes into it in a moment, the location map. And it's also going to start chugging on the numbers under the hood. It's going to start divvying them up into categories so that you can see the statistics of the market. It's going to start running those linear regressions. So that's why it takes a couple moments. Depending on how much property you shove at it, it may take up to maybe 30 seconds or so. But as you can see, before I finished my soapbox speech, it has finished processing. So it organizes the data into these major categories up at the top. This data tab is a raw list of all of the items that were in that CSV, and you can preview them here. These are all sortable by column as well. When you click on them, they sort, which comes in handy when you're trying to isolate outliers. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. So the data tab is a summary of everything and a way to exclude them. Now, I'll get into excluding later as we touch some of these other tabs, so we'll ignore that. Heading to the 1004MC tab, I won't harp on this too long because ever since 2009, we know what a 1004MC form is. You can see here that just like our other 1004MC import e-service, this one will slice and dice your numbers for you, the numbers that were fed to it, provide some neat statistics down at the bottom, like the price range, and the medium comparable sale price and the amount of monthly change, and any trends that you identify with your drop down arrow come back to your 1004MC form. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, all of this is optional. So even if you are not going to be using the ACI Analytics service to populate your 1004MC, don't be alarmed that it performed the math here on screen, because you can just ignore it on import. The data page with its exclude becomes really important with this 1004MC. As you know, there are some items or outliers that you don't want in the calculations for your market for your 1004MC. So coming back to the data tab, anything that you check as an exclusion here and hit refresh removes it. Now, this is a pretty powerful exclude. It removes those from all the calculations, from all the statistics, from all the mapping, and from the 1004MC. But if you wanted to go back and see what you've excluded, you can check on this drop down for the major category in the upper left and say, show me the excluded, and it'll show them to you. And if you want to bring one back from the excluded list, remove its check, hit refresh, and you've thrown it back into the mix with all the other stuff. This is a big exclusion, meaning you check exclude here and it excludes it from all this stuff. In a couple tabs, you're going to see another type of exclusion that only pulls it out of your farm list or out of the comp selection map, but not the whole regression or 1004MC. So that's the 1004MC for you. The market graphs are strictly facts about the market. The market graphs also in each upper left corner have a little checkbox. This is the start of what I was telling you earlier about you can decide what elements come back in on import. Anything you uncheck will not come back in. Anything you check does come in on the import. ACI report will automatically add the pages for you. I'll show you what those look like at the very end of this, so you don't have to worry about trying to build a pack or a report template that contains these forms. And we had some other questions in our previous training about these giant gray boxes. These comment fields don't show up as giant gray boxes on the import, or on, I should say, on printout or PDF or delivery of the file. These are just gray to show you that you have full control of what they say. You can type in your own comments, your own preset paragraphs. These are just comment fields. You can also resize this screen to make it easier when you're parsing through this data and deciding on which elements come in and which of them don't. And keep in mind, because the service is free effectively with your e-service contract, there's no harm in relaunching it, refeeding it another CSV with maybe a more dialed in or more targeted search and checking out the results of that analysis. Now, the market graphs are just facts about the data you fed it. Any of these data points that you hover over, it'll show you what the element was, and this becomes important in identifying outliers and getting rid of them. I'll show you a little more of that when we get to the regression tab. So the market graphs is just a series of facts about the market data that you'd fed it. And if you hover over them, it shows you how many and what number category they fall into. The comp selection tab. Now this is pretty cool. Not only is it built off of our sky maps, which means you can click and drag to pan, you can use your scroll mouse to zoom in or out, and you can flip it from hybrid satellite view down to the normal cartoon map, the painted map. But it allows you to see all of those properties plotted, as well as whether they were a sale or a listing color coded. Now, listings are blue, sales are green. This is another one of those screens where you can identify an outlier that you don't want in the mix and tell it to not be included in various calculations or this page. So at a high level, the comp selection means exactly that. You can choose to leave these as observes, as an observation, as an item on your farm list, something thrown into the mix. And you can tell it not to be used on this mapping screen or included on the farm list, or the namesake of the tab itself, you can select them as comps. So this would be the third use of this ACI Analytics e-service. to populate your comps grid or your listings with items from this spreadsheet. And some people just use it for that alone. All you have to do is highlight one that you want, make sure that's the bar you're on in the down arrow you've clicked, and identify what sale or listing it is. And when you click the next and then import buttons, it will populate your sales grid for you. Pretty cool, huh? What the do not use means here, and the reason this is different than the exclude, as you remember, when I was harping on the exclude over here, exclude nukes that entry or the selected entries out of the entire ball of wax, and it hides them. It's as if they were not even in the spreadsheet. And that's good for 1004MC, and that's good for regression analysis for identifying outliers and getting them out of your math. On this comp selection, if you highlight one and say do not use, that just hides it from this list. It does not appear on this farm list that imports, and it removes it from the screen on this map. That's all that is. So I wanted to recircle back on that just to say that you have full control over whether a property is not listed here on the map and part of this farm list that imports, or you can take it out of the equation altogether with the big exclude. Excluding is as simple as checking the box, hitting refresh, boom, they're gone. Unexcluding, same principle, remove the check boxes, refresh, they're back in the mix. So that's comp selection in a nutshell. The property characteristics tab is very similar to the market graphs in that it's a series of histograms or facts, just statistics about the data you fed it. So what this is saying is that the GLA, the statistical analysis of the GLA that I fed it from my output, show me that the properties range from 3,400 square feet to 12,000 square feet. So I gave it a really huge breadth of data. That may be exactly what you were looking for because you wanted a broad base, and that is truly the market your property is competing in. Or this may be an indicator of, wow, I've got only one property here on this far right side in the 12,000. Maybe I don't want that. Maybe I should take that out of the mix because who knows what other numbers it's going to throw out. So just like the market graphs, this property and characteristics tab is not a regression. It's not a calculation. It's just a list, a counting list. So here's the site area statistical analysis. What this means is of the sites in all the properties of the CSV that I gave it, the vast majority of them are within, call it 14,000 square feet. And I've got that one monster outlier. I don't know who lives there, but it's got to be a pricey property. So that's what the property characteristics is. It focuses on facts about the properties, number of cars, full bathrooms, things like that. So to review, market graphs is facts about the market, no analysis, just a list. And property characteristics are facts about the properties that you fed it in that CSV. Once again, if one of these doesn't make sense on a conclusion that you're trying to prove, like everyone loves seeing a spread of age, that's nice there. If the statistic wrapped around cars doesn't really set your report on fire, no problem. Uncheck it. And when you import it, that graph will not be included. If you wanted to leave it, but put a comment in there, you could do so. Now here's the meat of it. And I know a bunch of you are chewing on your mics thinking, Andy, just get to the regression. So what we've done is just a simple linear regression. Now, as my boss likes to say, there is more gray space over to the right here. There's room for growth. We wanted to come out with something that was simple, easy to understand, defensible, and useful. While we've got this out the door in that special web update, that analytics update, and while we're building all these map files, our developers are hard at work increasing the data points and the analysis that we can do. So yes, to forestall that inevitable question that I'll be getting at the end of the show here, yes, we've got a lot more planned, a lot more improvements and things that we can squeeze out of this analytics. So expect to see that grow in future web updates. But for now, let's go back and say, well, what exactly is this? Our linear regression compares price per something. And that's the heart of it. It's very simple and it's defensible because while this isn't supposed to give you the exact value that you should go and adjust on your grid, this gives you a very narrow view where you might be able to say, is there a direct relationship between the price and the square footage? I know many of you are grasping your pearls. Give me my fainting couch. I cannot believe there's a relationship between price and square footage. But what really this does is allows you to see how important that one minor factor may be in the overall calculations. And that's where the model fit comes into it. So this one is a fairly small sampling of properties. I think I maybe had 25 or 30 properties here that were sales, and it works great when I'm trying to do a demo because it loads quickly and it doesn't provide any challenges for sifting through too much data. But you can see that it doesn't give me really enough to feel comfortable on the higher end. On the previous graphs, I thought, well, there's that one monster property, that's the outlier on the square footage. Maybe I want to eliminate it, and that's true. Maybe I do want to eliminate that outlier here because it doesn't support or help me come to a conclusion based on the strength of the conviction that there is a relationship between price and GLA. This is where identifying the outliers comes into play. So let's say I wanted to get rid of this guy right here because this one it's not a factor that I want to consider, especially for my regression. When I hover my mouse over it, I see that its data point is 8892. That's the GLA, 8892. So I'm going to go back to my data tab, sort by GLA. Where did GLA go? Oh, I'm sorry, the comp selection tab. I'm going to go to the GLA and I'm looking for 8892. Once I find it, scroll down a little bit. There it is. I'm going to highlight it and I could change this to, oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to do not use and then exclude it. That would be one way to identify that outlier and get it off the radar so that it's no longer mathing out. It doesn't affect the 1004 MC and it will no longer affect my regression analysis. What this also might show me is that if I did want to keep these outliers, but fill in the picture more, maybe I knew deep down in my appraiser heart, and I'm not an appraiser, I'm just a computer nerd, but you know what I mean. If I knew that there were more properties that I could consider that if I were to include in my MLS, it would then fill out this graph and this ideal line. That red line is a perfect linear progression based on the data that's been fed into it. This model fit is roughly how close or the average those blue dots, those data elements were to that perfect line. So right now I've got a confidence in this narrow slice of the regression of 58%. If I had a ton of blue dots, a ton of properties that did tightly hug that line and a pattern emerged here where a line was drawn, the average, and they were all really grouped tightly around that red line, that model fit would be higher. And I could, with even greater confidence, include this graph and a comment saying, yes, at a very narrow glance, there is a direct and tangible relationship between the price per square foot and the subject and all the comps that I fed it. Now, again, I'll mention because I got some questions on this the last time we performed the training. This isn't saying that you should then go and make a $593 per square foot adjustment line item in your grid. But if you did want to crank up that dollars per square foot adjustment, this would be one of those elements that would allow you to comfortably say one of the reasons I chose value XYZ was because look at this. If we cast out everything aside, the view, the number of cars, the number of bathrooms, and we focus only on the GLA versus the price, there's a direct tangible relationship. Conversely, and let's scroll down, right here, we've divvied up the sale price versus the number of cars. We've got 3 cars, we got 4 cars, we got 5 cars, and we've got that Rockstar's property out here with 7. 7-car garage. Anyhow, this tells us with a confidence of only 37% that the data is all over the map. It's not very tightly grouped around that ideal line, that average of all the properties that were fed in that CSV. So this tells me that there's really no case to be made for, yeah, the more car garage you have, the higher price of the property. So I, as an appraiser filling out this report, may still wish to include the regression analysis, the linear regression on the number of cars versus price, because say, for example, you've got a reviewer or someone pushing on you that says, hey, I'm feeling pretty confident that the number of cars in your comps is not appropriate when being included. You'd be able to throw this into your report and say, look, the data is all over the board. We've got really expensive properties with only 4 cars, and we've got really cheap, comparatively, properties with 5 cars. You can't really make a strong case for that. So that's one of the powers of the regression analysis. Because we divvied it up into just very slender, narrow approaches, it's price per something. We're not saying that that should be the be all end all value, but you can strongly consider that as a fact. The age analysis here is great. I've seen some CSVs and some data pools that the age versus price, that there was a very pronounced and distinct relationship. And in that submarket, age was everything. The older a property got, that line went down diagonal. And you could make a very strong case saying, listen, the newer a property is in this market, that's what people are looking for. So this one, obviously the data points, once again, are all over the board. They're not very tightly grouped on this average, this red line. So the model fit, the R squared, is only 1.2. So like I said, that's not a bad thing. You can choose to uncheck it and not even speak to it, or you can choose to include it and put a comment that says, look, Ma, no hands. I told you so. There's no relationship between age in this market and sale price. So I think I've harped on that enough. Let's talk about the import. I've got all these data points. I've got property characteristic graphs. I've chosen a couple comps. I've adjusted my map. I've got market graphs that graph out items that based on the statistics on the market in the 1004 MC. I've got all this stuff. What if I don't want to use all that? What if I only wanted a couple of those regression and analysis graphs and my comps? This is where the magic happens. When you hit import into ACI, you're presented with one last screen that says, okay, select the items to import. Anything that's checked comes back in. And if you're missing a page, as I've mentioned previously, because a lot of these pages don't exist until you run that analytics special update ID, this will add them for you. If you didn't want to include the characteristic, the property histograms, just uncheck it. If you didn't want your 1004MC coming in, just uncheck it. When you hit OK, that's what it does. Imports all the data you've commanded to and all those check boxes into your report automatically. I've got my confirmation box to tell me that I clicked OK correctly, which is always a good thing to see. I've got a couple of the comps. Some of these I imported from a previous training. I guarantee you I didn't hand type these. As with any import, though, you get a little bit of garbage in, garbage out. And if there's any MLS providers lurking on the line today, I'm not trying to throw rocks at your data, but I think every appraiser here knows that sometimes some of the data that gets in there is a little on the crazy side. ACI will try its best to scrub or make appropriate the data that comes back in, especially when it comes to UAD formatting. But be aware that on import, you may end up having to do some cleanup. Those pages I mentioned that it imports automatically, it'll throw at the end of your file. It'll give me my property observation map. And here's my farm list. This is where it lists what comp it went to. It'll list the proximity to the subject. It'll list basically my farm list, and it's got multiple pages. Anything that was on that list page that I did not say do not include will appear here. And then I go for my graph pages. And again, I mention these gray boxes because it looks a little off-putting here. You're like, wow, that's a lot of weird gray spaces. But only visible when you're editing the file here. If I left these 3 boxes blank and only had this title, what comes out as a PDF or a hard copy printout of my report just has white space here, and it would have this title for the graph called median listing price versus median sales. So that's what these gray boxes are. I just feel like I got to explain it because I've had a couple questions about, wow, that's kind of ugly. Yeah, that's all just comment space. You could type stuff, you could leave it blank. It's all good. So there's one more thing I want to show you. This is more of the advanced section. And I guess I wouldn't expect you to go and conquer this on your own unless you're like me, a proud pocket protector wearing button pusher of a person. You can edit and create your own maps. Now, most users of the ACI Analytics e-service won't have to go into this because we, as I mentioned, are consuming your CSVs that you give us and creating that map for you and then listing it under your MLS name. So when you run the analytics web update, it may already be there for you. But a lot of appraisers out there are more on the technical side and want to have power over creating those links from the raw data in the CSV into the ACI sales grid, for example. So let me show you how to get to that. We're going to go to e-services, import analysis data, ACI Analytics. And as a quick reminder to the folks who may have signed up a little late, if you're clicking on this and you don't see this, that's because you have yet to run web update and type special update ID analytics. So I click on that. Now we know that the connection between your CSV and the ACI software is called a map. So what we're going to be doing is loading what we call the map manager. I go to import property data. This is where I would normally choose my map, which happens to be a Las Vegas one here. I should say Nevada, not Las Vegas. But instead of browsing out and choosing the CSV, I'm instead going to scroll to the very top and say create new map. So like I said just a moment ago, this is more of the advanced stuff. Most of you can safely roll your eyes at this because you won't need to go in here. But if you're a button pusher like me, this is what it looks like to edit or create your own map. What you do, highlight the one you want to edit, browse for your CSV file. This is where you've saved it from your MLS. And then you play the matching game. It gives you all the columns in that CSV. And then you highlight one, and using the blue arrows, you tell it what field in ACI to appear in. Now, this is pretty powerful because if you end up mismapping fields, like if I map the address instead of address from MLS into address into ACI, it'll let me take the address and put it to listing date. But that's just crazy. So it can be a little dangerous to go in here and edit existing ones unless you're very confident. Feel free if you see that a previously existing import, a map that we created, isn't bringing over key data points from your CSV. Like if you know you have a certain thing like fireplace in your MLS that kicks out into the CSV and you've opened it up in Excel and you've seen that CSV has a column for fireplace, but it's not coming into ACI, you can go into this map manager, edit your own map, and then scroll down until you see the fireplace and then match it up, clicking the left arrow. So let's just say my zip code was actually functional utility. I click it, and now anything in the zip code column of that CSV will now appear at the functional utility line. Now, this doesn't affect my analytics so much or my regression, and certainly not my 1004MC, but this would greatly affect how it works as a comp importer, because the more data elements that you or we connect from your MLS into ACI using this map, the more full your comp and listing import will be. So let me just cancel out of that. That was, like I said, if you're going to go push buttons, if you choose create new map. Most of y'all's, though, will just highlight the map that we've created for you and then browse for that CSV, and then boom, the magic appears on screen. Remember, you never want to have that CSV open in Excel, just in case. It'll give you crazy errors if ACI is trying to work on that file at the same time as your MLS or Excel. So that's really it. I should stop and thank you for the time you spent with me today. I know it's been a wild ride, a lot of information because this is such a new function in ACI and it does so much when you push a button. But